You're listening to Cultivation Elevated, hosted by Michael Williamson, where we discuss vertical farming and the future of cannabis and food production.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Cultivation Elevated, the podcast from PIP Horticulture, where we explore the people, technology, and the ideas shaping the future of cannabis and controlled environment agriculture. I'm Michael Williamson, and today we are diving into one of the most significant shifts in the cannabis industry has seen in years. Licensed medical cannabis has officially moved from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. But despite all the headlines, most operators still don't fully understand what actually has changed, what doesn't change, and where the real risks and opportunity lie. To help us cut through some of that noise, I'm joined by Christine Senni, a leading cannabis attorney who has deeply been involved in the regulatory strategy, compliance, and deal structure across multiple state markets. She works directly with operators and investors and executive teams navigating licensing, enforcement risks, multi-state expansion, and capital strategy. So she's not just interpreting policy from the outside, she's actively advising companies on how to respond to this shift in real time. And that's exactly why her perspective matters so much right now. With rescheduling, finalized, I'll put that in quotes. There's a lot of speculation, a lot of assumptions, and frankly, a lot of misinformation on the market. Christine brings a grounded real world lens on what this actually means for operators on the ground, financially, operationally, and strategically. So today we're going to break down what Schedule 3 really means, who actually can win here, who might be losing here, and what operators should be doing right now to position themselves to move forward. Christine, welcome to the show.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Well, let's just jump right into it. What is the most misunderstood part of Schedule 3 right now as it sits that operators are getting wrong and that could potentially cost them millions?
There's plenty, but I think what's really important for operators to understand is that it currently only applies to those who are licensed for medical marijuana activities in the states. So if they are planning to register or to take a different tax position and they are engaged in adult use or recreational, depending on which term you want to use, their time hasn't come yet. So that's a very expensive distinction for a lot of people right now. And I think the other piece is that they need to maybe slow down. The folks who are really excited on the medical side, take a breath and research what this means as far as how they need to start recording their financial expenditures, their capital expenditures, and so on. Because if they want to maximize their tax deductions and maximize their position moving forward, they need to make a plan for that, or they could be leaving money on the table for future filings.
Is this primarily a tax issue or a compliance issue or both, from your opinion?
Oh, I think it's both because for years, the cannabis industry has been operating outside of the realm of most federal regulation. So there's OSHA oversight, obviously, we're all familiar with the IRS, but the full-blown attention of the federal government hasn't been focused on this industry the way it has in others like pharmaceuticals or food and beverage and other very highly regulated fields. So this is going to be an adjustment phase for everybody.
All right, so if I am an MSO CFO right now, what am I doing tomorrow morning differently, specifically around 280E unwinding and tax positioning?
Well, first of all, I've probably already called a tax lawyer and my accountant firm to start circling up on what to do. But in addition to that, I would be maybe cautioning everybody else in the company who's celebrating this to take a pause. There's a 60-day window that is starting more or less tomorrow when the DEA opens their portal. And there's no prize for filing on day one. You have the same treatment in the 60-day period. So if I'm that CFO, I'm making sure that we have our plan in place before we hit go on the filing.
And that's a DEA filing you're referring to?
Correct. You will be filing with the DEA for essentially a license to be in possession as a manufacturer, distributor, or dispenser, or all three, depending on your situation, of a Schedule 3 drug based upon your state issued license.
What do you think the biggest missed opportunity is over the next 6 to 12 months in this particular side of things?
Oh, there's so
It's a loaded one.
that one's really loaded. And I think in some cases, the missed opportunity might be for the employees of these companies, almost even more so than the companies themselves. But I'll look at both. So, on the side of these companies, there are pieces of these regulations worth digging into around import and export into and out of jurisdictions. And there are also pieces around getting FDA recognition for products. And some people fear what I'm about to say, and some people are willing to embrace it. But maybe starting to look at, are we going to partner with a pharmaceutical firm on going after that FDA recognition? Do we want to talk with health insurance companies about providing coverage for medical patients now that this is a Schedule 3 drug and not a Schedule 1? There are a lot of opportunities out there. But as a former employee of an MSO that primarily offered medical, I will also say I have felt the pinch of having to pay 25% down on my mortgage rather than 20% because I work for a plant touching company. I have felt the stigma that comes from healthcare providers or other people in my community about working with a Schedule 1 drug. I think that there are possibilities out there for people that are going to open up now. And I think that's really exciting, especially for those of us who've been hanging in there for so long in this industry.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, there's going to be some cultural components of the industry that don't like this change. But there's also going to be people that maybe haven't had access to certain capital, have had issues with banking, taxes have been hard. So, I don't know if it's one of those like you can't have your cake and eat it too, but I do see it as a step in the right direction in legitimizing the industry. And I know for a lot of people, they kind of think the last few years has been a consolidation time. But as we talked earlier, I'm a big advocate. Just because you get a license doesn't mean that you get a seat at the table. You still have to perform. And so I still feel personally that we're in the infantile stages of cannabis and we're now just kind of like taking this next chapter. And people, I like to think that people should be excited. There's more to navigate, but it's always been kind of a landmine field. And so if you weren't comfortable navigating it before, you might not be comfortable in the future, but I think for a lot of us have kind of gotten, solid foundation under us and have kind of gone through the good and the hard times in this
Mhm.
space. And this is just another part of the story, in my opinion.
I think that's so true. And change is scary for all of us. And in some ways, things have been stagnant for several years. We've all been waiting for safe banking or safer banking or something to come along. And, going back to what other things should companies be looking at? If I'm one of the bigger MSOs, I'm sure I've already looked at uplisting, probably reaching out to credit card processing companies. Maybe now they will let people use credit cards and debit cards for transactions at medical dispensaries. There's so many of these great opportunities that can move the needle either incrementally or significantly as far as your ability to raise capital and also reducing the friction of executing on commercial transactions in this space. So I think those things are really, really exciting. But I also am hopeful that with this will come some meaningful opportunities for patients who are treated by medical marijuana. I really do hope that Medicaid and health insurance will cover medical marijuana because I think that can increase the pool of patients who are receiving treatment through medical cannabis, which is I personally have experience with seeing how it can help benefit people's lives.
Absolutely. I think I shared with you earlier, I'm on year 18 as an owner operator. So in those early Colorado days, I mean, I remember the first time we had access to lab testing and we kind of discovered that, oh, wow, there's not that much THC in this one. Oh, look, it's elevated in CBD. Oh, by the way, there's a long waiting list of young children for Charlotte's Web down in Colorado
Mhm.
Springs. Oh, hey, look, we have an 18 to 1. We can maybe offer this other people. And, sadly, I've gone to children's funerals and all those types of things that
Mhm.
sometimes where it's just too late. But that being said, when I owned the retail in the earliest years, one of the things that became really clear to me was if you are using this for medical purposes and you have something serious going on, it's a very expensive therapy. And we did
Mhm.
everything we could. We had all kinds of advocacy programs and we discounted as hard as we could. But if you're using this for true medicinal needs and you have some kind of high dose situation, it's not always the most cost effective therapy. So the idea of getting some support here, whether that's through insurance or otherwise government assistance, that's massive for people that are, hurting.
Yes.
That'd be very cool. Okay, so I'll stop reminiscing about later years and talk more about the future. So one of my questions is, does this actually change like enforcement risk, or is this just tax and research story dressed up as reform?
I don't see the DEA granting people Schedule 3 status and taking in registration applications and not engaging in some enforcement. It just does not seem possible, especially since they currently engage in enforcement for other operators who have similar licenses and registrations to possess and sell Schedule 3 drugs. It's welcome to the party that everybody else is a part of. I do think it was wise and thoughtful to acknowledge the state regimes that are already in place, the state licensing systems, the inventory management piece. I grew up in a family of regulators. I've worked in government myself. These sorts of things don't just happen with the flip of a switch. I think what's more likely to happen is they're going to get the lay of the land of the different operators and the different states and the different programs. But these regulations do say that the DEA has the authority to step in and regulate. And so if they're starting to see things, especially on the inventory diversion side, I think they're going to step in.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, some of these state programs are depends on what state you are on or what coast you're on, but some of them are very strict and then some of them are very loose, even though
Mhm.
there's enforcement there. So do we just see this as a secondary layer of enforcement, or do we see the federal and state agencies working together?
I can say that in Florida, they often work together. They
Okay.
often talk with each other because frequently in Florida, if you've violated Florida's Controlled Substances Act and you're engaging in diversion of inventory, you are also violating the federal Controlled Substances Act. And so the two agencies often partner together on enforcement and inspections in those circumstances that rise to a level of concern.
That makes sense. What hasn't changed that people think has? I know a lot of people think a lot of things, but what is one of the things you've heard in the last week where you're like, that's not right?
Well, first of all, not all cannabis is Schedule 3. It's just a very narrow group, right? It's people with a medical license who go to the DEA and register for this Schedule 3 status. So, a lot of what is happening in these medical programs in these states is going to remain exactly the same for people who are on the ground. I don't think the DEA is going to knock on everybody's doors on day two. As far as the rest of it, I'll be honest with you. We're what, a week into this? There's a lot of question marks. We're still waiting for guidance from the IRS on how they're going to treat looking forward or, especially the retroactive treatment for medical licensees. We don't know how it's going to be when you get on an airplane. I would say still use caution traveling with these substances and research the laws of the states where you're going. I think that most just getting the word out is going to take a while because in our industry, there's an echo chamber. And so the word has gotten out faster to our part of the world than it has to the rest of the US population. So this is going to take time for everybody. And so change happens fast and then slow. And so we've got this big jump in news, and now it has to be digested through all these systems and processes. So I think a lot of people need to take a breath.
It's fair enough. I know the cannabis industry is like pulling at strings and gets excited over almost anything. But this one felt different, though, I will say. And I heard a lot of people refer to it, and I actually like this analogy, and I've kind of regurgitated it as well. I'm about to do it right now. But this seems like it was a meaningful domino, but there's
Mhm.
still a lot of other dominoes that need to fall and need to be understood.
I wholeheartedly agree with that.
So let's talk theoretical winners and losers. Who are the real winners and losers of rescheduling? Is that operators, pharma, new entrants? Is there a reason why someone, because in a lot of these states, they start off medical and then adult use comes on, and then you see the
Mhm.
shift that all the attention goes to adult use because it's easier access, there's bigger numbers, maybe it's more lucrative, whatever it might be. And you kind of see the medical programs sometimes get abandoned in some of these states a little bit. So I guess I'd love to understand who are the real winners and losers in this equation?
Well, I think you've pointed out there are a lot of states with combined programs. Potential losers are licensees who don't understand. They've got to now become very careful about what they record in their financials on the Schedule 3 side of the fence and what gets recorded on the 280E side of the fence because the IRS is going to look very closely at that. Fortunately, there was a case that's already sort of addressed this. It was called Champs out of California. And so I think we're going to hear a lot more about the Champs case as guidance and a guideline to work off of for those people who have mixed businesses to make sure they're not getting penalized tax wise for where they're, trying to file their taxes and get the most benefit. I do think that in the long run, patients could be one of the big winners because this may increase access. I've seen it play out in states like you have, where the money has been in the recreational market. And so licensees are rational economic actors. They've got a business to run, they've got costs of goods sold, they've got doors to keep open, and everything incentivizes them in these current markets to do more for the adult use. So I think this is going to change that equation some for patients and reopen more access in some of those mixed use states, which could be a good thing for them. I think this could be a great time to be a new entrant because you're coming in with a clean balance sheet and you don't have those carryover liabilities with the IRS. I think some of the operators with longer standing burdens are still in a holding pattern. There are cases pending before the IRS in various levels of administrative law challenges that I'll save you the boring details on, but that whole process remains ongoing for several of the big name operators that we've read about in the industry, and even for some of the smaller actors too. If you're coming in fresh and new, you don't have that burden. So this could be good for those new operators. I would say in a state like Florida, where I'm located, where it's a medical only state currently, right? You've got to be
The
vertically,
largest, right?
it's the largest medical state. Vertical integration is required. It is incredibly capital intensive to stand up a license in Florida, and all of a sudden you've got some relief on that. And considering there had been two rounds of failed amendment initiatives on the ballot for adult use, this is a ray of sunshine for a lot of those operators. But As far as who the ultimate winners are, I could be pharma, could be all of the above. Some of it depends on who's looking at this carefully and figuring out a clever strategy. And I think it's going to be a combination of hard work, being clever, and some good luck.
Fair enough. That sounds like the cannabis industry in a nutshell, anyways.
Pretty much. There's just new options and new rules available to people now. So there's, some of the folks who lobbied for this and advocated for this probably have an advantage because as first movers, because they knew this was coming and were planning for it. But that doesn't mean they're the only ones who are going to benefit or be able to maximize their advantage either. So only one weekend, I think the answer is to be determined.
Fair enough. Is there a scenario where Schedule 3 actually hurts parts of the cannabis industry?
I think it could, especially since we're waiting to see what happens with the non-medical side, right? There's going to be rulemaking. There's probably going to be litigation at some point that creeps up, either challenging the final order that just came out, affording this status to the medical operators, or to whatever is done for rulemaking and potential re or descheduling of adult use cannabis. I wish I had a crystal ball. There's a scenario where big tobacco and big alcohol step in once it becomes advantageous for them tax wise and not a big Schedule 1 liability for them. Depending on how it's treated on the recreational side, there's a possibility, I think, that's smaller of big pharma completely taking over because the way that products are developed, it is almost a molecule specific, not quite, but it is a very substance specific approval process. And so having just cannabis flower approved as an FDA approved product is not impossible, but it doesn't look as likely the way things are currently set up right now. So I think that consolidation is going to continue, and I think that is something that smaller operators need to be mindful of. But I also see a scenario where, however the dominoes fall, you see craft growers and craft operators being valued just like your smaller coffee shops, your smaller craft brewers are valued in communities and throughout the American economy the same way that you see Starbucks and, Anheuser-Busch, InBev, and all of those.
Sure. All those craft companies, and if they can hold their own feet, they usually get bought out anyways. They're like, oh, I want that in my portfolio. So you had mentioned new entrants maybe have some strategic advantages, and I was just thinking when you were talking, I was like, you do have a lot of advantages from like a design build standpoint. So versus having to retro a facility. So how should operators think about like GMP, FDA oversight, and pharmaceutical standards creeping into cultivation and manufacturing?
It's coming for everyone, regardless of where the scheduling happens. I think now that the door has opened to federal regulation, it's likely to continue, but especially for medical operators, they need to continue on the path that they've already been on. To be frank, most states have adopted some form of GMP requirement into their programs, especially on the medical side. And a key component of GMP is continuous improvement, and the companies who perform those audits do take that seriously. They do take standards building seriously. So I strongly commend people to pay attention to that and to pay attention to what's going on over at ASTM and their subcommittee that's handling cannabis standards, because I think that is going to start applying to everybody more and more frequently.
Wonderful. My last question, and I want to thank you for your time today. What are the next three legal or regulatory dominoes, quote unquote, that fall, and in what order?
Oh,
If you
regulatory.
did have a magic ball.
If I did have a magic ball, I do think that this administration is very keen to either or deschedule adult use cannabis. It just seems to be, I mean, that's something that the president has mentioned before. That's something that key members of the cabinet have mentioned before. And I do think for some of the members of the current party in power who've been nervous about it, they also now see cannabis rescheduling and quote unquote legalization as a path to fighting crime and fighting cartels. So I do think we're going to continue to see this change happen across the board with other, with the rest of the cannabis industry. When that happens or what that looks like, I don't know. And then as far as the hemp side of the fence, I don't know
Mm,
how that changes that calculus either, because at some point the two collapse on themselves.
sure.
So it may be that if rescheduling happens soon enough, you see more collaboration between the hemp and adult use side than you're seeing right now. And maybe you see some of the weapons that have been drawn get put down. I don't know. I've got maybe 10 different scenarios in my head, and I don't know which one's going to play out.
Sure. Well, I really appreciate your time and honesty today. For everyone listening, this is exactly why we do this, cutting through the noise and focusing on what actually matters for operators, from design to infrastructure to strategy and execution. So I just really want to appreciate you joining us today, and to everyone tuning in, thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Cultivation Elevated.